The silver fork fell to the floor with a sharp metallic clang. The kitchen fell silent. Nora Hayes stood there, still holding the dish towel, watching her daughter, in-law, speak in a voice as soft as wind, but sharp as a blade. "Mother, I think it's best if you stay home this time. It's a long flight and you get tired easily. Just look after the house for us, all right?" Ethan, Nora's son, looked up from his phone with an awkward smile. "You know, Mom, this trip is just for us to relax a little. Greece is hot. You wouldn't handle it well." Nora set the towel down her eyes, drifting slowly to the suitcases stacked neatly in the hallway, each one labeled cream-colored, matching with brand-new travel sandals beside them. The wife, the husband, the 2 children, all ready for the vacation she once thought she'd be part of, but her name wasn't on the tickets. "We just need you to stay home," Ethan said again, his voice careful, trying to sound gentle. "We'll send you pictures every day." The words were simple, ordinary, even, but they hit like a slap to the heart of a woman who had spent half her life raising her son with calloused hands and sleepless nights grading papers. Nora nodded. "Of course. I'll water the plants and lock up carefully." They left on a bright sunny morning. The car rolled away down the bougainvillea-lined street. Their laughter faded, carried away by the ocean breeze of Santa Barbara. She didn't wave. She just stood in the doorway silent like a forgotten statue. The house soon sank into stillness. The pendulum clock ticked, sounding like her own heartbeat slowing down. On the kitchen table, Nora noticed a thick white envelope buried among the mailers. Printed on it were the words, "E-Tickets Athens." She opened it. 4 tickets lay inside, still untouched, never sent. Her name wasn't on them. She stared so long her eyes blurred, her fingers trembling. The black letters were clear, Athens, 2 adults, 2 children. Departure date 3 days later. She pulled out a chair and sat down, holding a cup of tea gone cold. In her mind echoed her late husband's voice. "You know they'll grow up and then they'll forget us." She smiled faintly, not because he'd been right, but because the forgetting had carved a space she had never dared to fill. Nora stood and went to the drawer for an old notebook. She called the travel agency, her voice calm, almost unnaturally so. "I'd like to cancel the tickets under the names Ethan and Marcy Hayes," she said. On the other end, the young agent hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you tell me the reason?" Nora answered softly. "No need. Just cancel them, please." There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Done, ma'am." She set the phone down, her hands still trembling, but her lips slightly curved. In that moment, Nora realized she wasn't angry, she wasn't regretful. She only felt an eerie kind of peace. She brewed another pot of tea, poured it into her porcelain cup, and watched the thin steam fade into the sunlight. That evening, she sat on the porch as the sea breeze moved through her hair. Her neighbor, Mr. Miguel, called over the fence. "Your son's gone already." Nora smiled. "He has. Now it's my turn." He laughed, thinking she was joking. But the next morning, Nora truly left. She woke before dawn. In the warm yellow light, she opened the wardrobe and chose a turquoise linen dress she'd kept hidden for years. The one her husband once said made her look like the ocean wind. She looked in the mirror and saw a face no longer young, yet her eyes shone with the brightness of an open sky. Nora withdrew the last of her savings from the bank, $12,000 and a few old bonds her husband had left. No debts, no dependents. She booked a flight to Lisbon alone. Not Greece, where they were supposed to go, but the place she had once dreamed of as a young woman. Lisbon, the city of sun of music and of late beginnings. That afternoon, Ethan called on video, unaware of what had happened. "Mom, something strange. The agency said our tickets were canceled. Did you get any email about it?" Nora set her teacup down, her tone calm. "Maybe it was a mistake." "You should check again." Ethan looked uneasy, turning to his wife. Marcy frowned, annoyed. "Just rebook them before we lose the trip." Nora looked at the late-a-day light filtering through the window, touching her husband's photo on the shelf. "You see, Paul," she whispered, "they never imagined I could go farther than this garden." 2 days later, Nora lifted a small suitcase onto the porch. The bougainvillea bloomed crimson above her. She opened the wooden gate, letting the sea breeze rush in, carrying the scent of salt and lavender. She locked the door and taped a note, "For Mr. Miguel, please, water the plants. I'll be back when I've had enough." The airport was crowded that early morning. The loudspeaker announcements, the sound of rolling suitcases, children laughing. It all blended together. Nora held her ticket, her fingers trembling slightly. When the security officer asked, "First time traveling alone, ma'am?" she smiled. "No, first time I've chosen for myself." The plane took off, breaking through layers of white clouds. Nora looked down at the ocean's silver light spreading beneath the wings. Inside her, something was melting away. The years of being forgotten, the words "Mom, stay home" like ropes finally snapping. Somewhere between the sky and the sea, Nora closed her eyes. She was no longer the housekeeper, no longer the one left behind. She was flying, and this time the destination wasn't a place. It was herself. The hotel doors opened to a breath of salt from the Atlantic. Nora stepped into the lobby of the Lisbon Inn, an old yellow-painted building with red tiles gleaming in the midday sun. She pulled her small suitcase behind her, a few beads of sweat clinging to her shoulder, but her lips curved slightly. For the first time in years, she didn't have to wait for anyone, didn't have to ask if someone was tired or hungry. Every step belonged entirely to her. The young receptionist greeted her with a bright smile, her English laced with the soft melody of Portuguese. "Third floor, ma'am. There's a balcony overlooking Alfima." Nora nodded, accepting the key with a faint tremor in her hand. 3 flights of old stairs creaked beneath her steps. She opened the door, letting sunlight pour into the small room. The air smelled of pine wood pigeons cooed on the rooftop, and blue window frames opened to the dazzling view of the city. Lisbon seemed to embrace her with light. Nora set down her suitcase and sat on the edge of the bed. She looked around a painting of rowers on the Tagus River, an old bedside lamp, a small mirror reflecting a face lined with age, but eyes alive with light. She chuckled softly to herself. "All right, Nora, now live." The afternoon descended slowly, washing the rooftops in gold. Nora wandered through the old quarter, her feet brushing the cobblestone streets. Vendors called out in a language she didn't understand, yet their smiles were the same as those back home, warm and sincere. A small cafe sat on the corner, its wooden chairs worn smooth, its glass door misted. Nora stepped inside. The melancholic sound of fado filled the air like the voice of souls that had walked through loss. The waitress brought her a cup of black coffee and a slice of custard tart. Nora sat by the window, watching the lights shimmer across the tabletop. At the next table, a silver-haired woman with cropped hair was cleaning the lens of a camera. Their eyes met, and the woman gave her a gentle nod. First time in Lisbon, her voice carried a French accent, low and husky. Nora smiled. "Yes, I just flew in this morning, and I'm here for the 10th time," the woman replied with a spark in her eyes. "I'm Clara. I photograph people who travel alone. And you, Nora, I used to teach literature. Now I'm just learning how to breathe again." The line made them both laugh softly and sincerely. They talked until night fell. Clara shared stories of her travels, Morocco, Provence, Kyoto, places where she had lived, loved, and lost her husband in a mountain accident. Nora listened in silence, hearing in Clara's voice a loneliness much like her own, only hidden behind her journeys. People have two youths, Clara said. One when they first fall in love, and the other when they stop fearing solitude. Nora said nothing, but her heart stirred with something painful and beautiful. Back in her room, Nora opened the small notebook she had brought with her. The first page held only one sentence: "If life gives me a ticket, I will not turn back." She added another line, "Lisbon, where I begin again, not for anyone, but for myself." That night, she stood on the balcony, gazing down at the street, glowing with light. In the corner of the square, a street singer performed in Portuguese, his rough voice full of longing. The music slipped into Nora's heart, awakening memories she thought had long since slept. She remembered Paul, her late husband. When they were young, they had promised to travel through Europe together, but life work and children had blurred that dream into the past. Now she was here alone, standing in a foreign city, keeping that forgotten promise at last. When she turned back inside, her phone was vibrating. A message from Ethan, "Mom, we rebooked the tickets. We have to fly out today. Please take care of yourself. Nothing more." She stared at the screen for a long moment, then switched it off. Not out of anger, but from the familiar exhaustion of being overlooked. The next morning, Nora rose early. Sunlight streamed through the window, and the smell of fresh pastries filled the street. She returned to the cafe from the day before. Clara was already there, scribbling in her notebook. "I'm looking for a model," Clara said when she saw Nora. "Would you like to be my Lisbon woman for today's photo?" Nora laughed. "A fake Lisbon woman. Do I look the part?" "Perfectly." Clara replied, her eyes glinting. "Because you look at the world like someone who has lost it once." They walked along the Tagus River where small boats swayed in the mist. Clara took photographs while Nora stood gazing into the distance. The waves lapped softly, light, glinting on the water like ribbons of silver. In that moment, Nora felt her heart grow still. The sense of abandonment was gone, replaced by the rhythm of breath, wind, and sea. On her way back that afternoon, she stopped by a secondhand bookstore near the hotel. A brown leather notebook caught her eye. She opened it and read a line someone had written inside. "Freedom doesn't begin with a step. It begins with a sentence, 'I will go.'" She bought the notebook as if to make that sentence her own. When night fell, Nora sat writing a letter to Lila, her 17-year-old granddaughter. "I am in a place of gentle sunlight and blue sea where no one tells me to stay home. If you ever get the chance, never be afraid to go far. The world remains open for those who dare to step out." She didn't send it, only folded it and tucked it into her notebook. Outside, church bells rang slowly. Nora closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Beyond the window, Lisbon still glowed bright, as if reminding her that sometimes, to find oneself, one must first be lost. The cry of seagulls woke Nora on her third morning in Lisbon. Sunlight spilled into the small room, stretching across the white sheets and over the veins that traced her aging hands. On the table, a cup of coffee still steamed beside the postcard she had written to Lila the night before. "I'm learning to live slowly." She smiled, sealed it, and carefully tucked it into her purse. She stepped out into the street with no plan except to walk toward the sun. The tram bells chimed softly as they wound between yellow-painted houses with blue-framed windows. The scent of pastries and coffee mingled with the tang of salt from the sea. Every narrow alley told its own story, and Nora felt as if her life were a blank page being rewritten in color. In Rocio Square, she met Clara again, her new friend. Today, Clara wore a wide-brimmed hat, her camera slung over her shoulder, her smile radiant. "Are you ready for a morning of freedom?" she asked in her smoky voice. Nora nodded. "I don't know what freedom looks like yet, but I'm ready to find out." They boarded the legendary tram 28 together. Through the open window, the wind brushed their faces, carrying dust and the scent of citrus. The two women in their 70s laughed like children. Clara lifted her camera and captured Nora shielding her eyes from the sun. "Beautiful," she said. "Not because of age, but because of courage." The tram stopped in Alfama, a maze of steep alleys, moss-covered walls, and bright clotheslines. A Portuguese woman with silver hair stood at her window singing Fado. Her voice, mournful yet proud, told stories of souls that had once been left behind. Nora stood still, listening, tears rolling down her cheeks unnoticed. Clara watched her quietly, then placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Do you miss someone?" she asked. Nora nodded. "My husband. He once promised to take me traveling, but then came the war, the work, the children. In the end, we never went anywhere." Clara said nothing, only reached into her wallet and pulled out an old photograph of a man standing on a snowy mountain peak, holding up a wool hat, smiling wide. "I lost him too, around your age. I thought my life was over then. But losing the one you love can sometimes be how you find yourself again." Nora looked at the photo, then at the woman before her. In Clara's eyes, there was no more pain, only the calm acceptance of someone who had carried her loss until it became a part of her. By noon, they stopped at a small riverside cafe. A young waiter brought them 2 plates of grilled fish and chilled white wine. Nora watched the people passing by. Tourists, locals, children chasing a ball, everyone in motion, while she felt herself drifting gently like a quiet boat. "I used to think my life ended when Paul died," she said. "But now I see it only paused, waiting for me to turn the switch back on." Clara lifted her glass, tapping it lightly against Nora's. "Then here's to your switch." They laughed together, their laughter rising light and free in the golden air. By late afternoon, they climbed the Miraduro da Senhora do Monte, the lookout that watched over the city. Lisbon shimmered below them, rooftops glowing red in the last light of day, stretching like a sea of waves. Nora sat on a stone step and breathed deeply. She was tired, but for the first time she didn't feel alone. Clara sat beside her, jotting notes in her notebook. "I'm preparing my next project," she said. "I want to photograph women who travel alone, not because they were left behind, but because they chose to go." Nora turned toward her, eyes glinting with curiosity. "Maybe I'll be one of your models." "There's no maybe," Clara said, smiling. "You already are." That night, Nora returned to her hotel with a lightness she hadn't felt in decades. She opened the window and watched the city sleep. In the distance, church bells rang in steady rhythm. Down below, a group of young people strummed guitars and sang. She took out her notebook and wrote another line. "Today, I saw myself through the eyes of a stranger, and I liked who I saw." When the room went dark, Nora dreamed of the sea. In her dream, she walked along the shore, the waves lapping at her feet, the blue sky stretching endlessly above. Somewhere far away, someone was calling her name. It wasn't her son's voice or her husband's, but her own, younger, stronger, echoing from a distant place. "Go, Nora. There's still so much to see." The next morning, as the first sunlight entered through the window, Nora knew she wouldn't stop in Lisbon. Beneath her door lay a note from Clara Florence. "A train leaves at 8 a.m. I think you'll love it." Nora held the paper, feeling excitement bloom inside her. She closed her suitcase, tied a scarf around her neck, and whispered, "Florence it is. Why not?" She locked the door and walked down the stairs. In the mirror at the end of the hallway, the reflection showed a silver-haired woman with a bright smile and a suitcase in hand. She was no longer the mother left behind, no longer the shadow in an empty house. Now Nora Hayes was on her way, this time for herself. The afternoon sun in Florence poured like honey over the red-tiled roofs. The train stopped at Santa Maria Novella station, the screech of metal wheels pulling Nora out of her drifting thoughts. She stood, lifted her suitcase, and stepped onto the platform where the air carried a blend of lavender dust and coffee. In that moment, her heart raced like someone about to meet a lover for the first time. Clara was waiting at the gate, wearing a straw hat and holding her camera. "You're here," she said, smiling brightly. "Welcome to the city of art and rebirth." Nora laughed. "All I want first is an espresso, and after that, rebirth can come as it pleases." Together they wheeled their luggage through the crowd, surrounded by the hum of laughter and the mix of different languages. They rented a small room near the Ponte Vecchio, its window opening to the Arno River glittering in the sun. Nora stepped onto the balcony, watching her reflection ripple on the water. Something was different now. Her eyes no longer carried fear or waiting, only peace. That evening, they walked to the Uffizi Square, where the warm, golden streetlights fell across marble statues. Inside the museum, standing before the birth of Venus, Nora grew still. The woman in the painting, naked and fragile yet radiant, seemed to be welcomed by the entire world as a newly reborn soul. Clara stood beside her and said softly, "You see, Venus wasn't born to be beautiful. She was born to be free." Nora pressed her lips together. "I used to think freedom was for the young. Now I know it comes only when you stop asking for permission." Leaving the museum, they sat at a small cafe by the street. The scent of toasted bread and red wine filled the air. Clara spoke of her years wandering the world, living by photography. "People thought I was running away," she said, "but really I was looking for a place where I didn't have to prove anything anymore." Nora nodded slowly. "I understand. I've spent my whole life trying to be seen as a good mother, a good wife. Only now do I ask, what about me?" She pulled from her bag an unsent letter to Ethan. The paper was neatly folded, the handwriting uneven. "Son, I'm fine. Don't look for me. Don't pity me. Learn to see me as a person, not a side character in your story." Nora placed the letter on the table. "I don't know if I'll ever send it." Clara looked at her gently. "It's all right. Writing it means you already have." That night, they walked across the Ponte Vecchio. The river wind was cool and damp, carrying the scent of old metal. Beneath their feet, the water shimmered with moonlight. Clara raised her camera. "Look at me, Nora." She took a photo, then turned back, half joking, half serious. "This one will be called The Woman Who Stopped Asking Permission." Nora laughed, though her eyes filled with tears. "That's a beautiful title." The next morning, Nora woke early while Clara was still asleep. She stepped onto the balcony, watching the city wake beneath her. Church bells echoed in the distance, and the pink light of dawn spilled across the rooftops. She opened her notebook and wrote Florence the place where I learned to see myself, not through mirrors, but through light. They spent the entire day walking through the narrow streets. Nora admired the leather shops, the old bookstores, and the cafes with weathered wooden chairs. Clara photographed everything, the sunlight through a wine glass, Nora's hand choosing postcards, cats napping beneath porches. In the middle of it all, Nora's phone vibrated. A message from Ethan, "Mom, where are you? We're worried." There was no apology, no genuine question, just a command wrapped in the word, worried. Nora didn't reply. She turned off the phone and slipped it into her bag. In the late afternoon, they sat at a riverside cafe. A group of students played music, their young voices blending with the sound of flowing water. Clara leaned back, closing her eyes. "Do you feel alive?" she asked. Nora nodded. For the first time in 40 years. As the sun disappeared behind the bridge, Clara spoke again, her voice softer. "Nora, have you ever thought you might fall in love again?" Nora looked surprised, then laughed. "I thought this heart had retired long ago. Hearts don't retire, Clara said, gazing into the distance. They just wait for their owner to open the door. That night, Florence was silent as if listening to every breath. Nora lay in the dark, hearing the gentle splash of water beneath the bridge. She thought of Clara's words, of Paul, of her son, and finally of herself. Life wasn't long anymore, but it was still enough for another chapter. The next morning, they wandered through the San Lorenzo market. Clara bought a bright yellow silk scarf and pressed it into Nora's hands. "Keep this. When you wear it, remember you're no longer the one left behind." Nora smiled. "Yellow like the Lisbon sun." "Like life," Clara corrected. That afternoon, they sat at a small wine bar, sipping something light and sweet. Clara spoke of her photo project, which she would title "The Women Who Chose Themselves." She wanted Nora to be the opening portrait. Nora agreed without hesitation. In that moment, she knew she had crossed the line between merely existing and truly living. That night, when Nora checked her phone again, there were 12 missed calls from Ethan and one message, "Mom, I'm sorry. Please just tell me you're okay." She stared at the glowing screen in the darkness. She felt no anger, only peace. She typed a few words, then erased them, and finally wrote, "I'm fine. Learn to believe that." Then she turned off the phone, letting the moonlight fall across her calm face. Somewhere in Florence, a woman once told she was too old to go far, was finally learning how to live for the very first time. Light rain began to fall as the train left Florence, the droplets tracing long streaks down the glass. Nora sat by the window, a yellow silk scarf wrapped around her neck, her eyes following the vineyard sliding past. Clara sat opposite her in silence, fingers resting lightly on her camera. Neither spoke for the first half hour, but between them lay the comfortable quiet of two people who understood silence. "I never thought I'd go this far," Nora said softly. "Before, whenever I wanted to leave somewhere, I always waited for someone to invite me. Now I invite myself." Clara looked up with a faint smile. "That's why I brought you here. Lisbon was the beginning. Florence was reflection. The next place is the test. The next place," Nora tilted her head. "Marrakesh," Clara replied. "Hot, loud, dazzling, and real. If Lisbon is where the heart opens, Marrakesh is where it's tested by fire." Nora laughed but didn't protest. Inside her rose a kind of excitement she hadn't felt in decades. 3 days later, they arrived in Morocco. The air seemed to burn, sunlight poured gold across the city. Marrakesh was a maze of colors, red clay walls, market stalls spilling with spices, voices echoing through narrow alleys. Nora felt as if she had stepped into a world that breathed with full force, alive and unapologetic, careful. Clara said, smiling as she adjusted her turban, "This place makes people forget their age." "All the better," Nora replied, wiping sweat from her brow. "I've been ready to forget mine for a long time." They rented a room in an old riad deep within the Medina. The courtyard bloomed with jasmine and a small fountain shimmered at its center. Nora unpacked her suitcase, looking at her faded linen dress and worn flats. She decided she would buy herself new sandals, something bright. That afternoon, they wandered through Jema Elfna Square, where everything was for sale. Woven rugs, brass lamps, spices, perfumes, even dreams. The air pulsed with drums and the strings of the oud. Nora stopped at a stall of roses where a local girl, no older than 10, was carefully arranging petals. The girl looked up, her dark eyes shining. "Flowers for luck, madame." Nora bought them all without bargaining. The girl's eyes widened, then she smiled a smile as radiant as the sun. "What's your name?" Nora asked in simple English. "Lamia," the girl answered shyly. Nora knelt, wrote the name in large letters on a piece of paper. "Here, Lamia. Your name is beautiful. Learn to write it so you can sign your life with it." The girl beamed, hugging the flowers to her chest. Clara captured the moment with her camera. When the shutter clicked, Nora turned and found Clara watching her quietly. "You just planted a seed," Clara said. "It may not bloom today, but one day it will." That night they sat on the Riyadh's rooftop, the hot wind carrying the scent of cinnamon and sand. Below them, the city refused to sleep, lights glowing dimly, music echoing from afar. Nora sipped mint liqueur and said, "This place feels like my heart after being hurt, burning but still beautiful." Clara smiled. "Yes, but not everyone is brave enough to watch it burn." Later that night, Nora checked her phone. A message from Ethan read, "Mom, I've been calling nonstop. Please tell me where you are. Marcy and I are worried." She read it over and over, then sighed. They worry, she thought, but not for me, for their idea of me. She turned the phone off. The next morning, they visited the Majorelle Garden. The sky was clear and the water reflected its blue perfectly. Nora sat on a stone bench watching young travelers pose for photos. Clara silently raised her camera and took a picture. Not a posed one, but a moment where Nora was simply looking at the world with open eyes. This one, Clara said, will be called "The Woman Who Just Remembered She's Alive." In the afternoon, they returned to the Riyadh. Nora wrote in her notebook, "Maybe freedom isn't loud. It's just the moment you no longer need to explain yourself." That evening, the wind rose sharply, shaking the city with waves of hot air. Nora sat by the window, watching lightning flash on the horizon. She thought of Paul. The day he died, a storm had struck too. Back then, she believed her life was shattered. But now, as the African sky lit up in brilliant flashes, she understood. Some storms don't come to destroy, they come to clear the way. Clara entered, carrying a bottle of wine. "I was thinking," she said, "we should keep going." Lisbon opened the door, Florence reflected us, Marrakesh tested us. "Now it's time for the sea." "Which sea?" "Greece," Clara replied. "Santorini, the place you were once told not to set foot in." Nora looked at her, then laughed. "Then let's go. I've never won against anyone in my life, but maybe it's time I win against my own limits." Outside, the wind grew stronger. The storm was coming, but inside Nora, another sky was beginning to brighten. She wasn't afraid of the wind anymore. For the first time, she knew she was the one holding the wheel. Morning rose over Marrakesh in blazing sunlight. Nora opened the window and drew in a deep breath of air, thick with the scent of earth cinnamon and cooking smoke. Clara was still asleep, her breathing slow and steady, while Nora stood quietly looking down at the courtyard of the Riyadh. The little girl from yesterday, Lamia, was sweeping leaves and waved when she saw her. The sight warmed Nora's heart, as if memories of her teaching days came rushing back, when just one bright-eyed glance from a child could light up her entire day. At noon, Clara invited Nora to the carriage station. "Let's go to the outskirts, see the red clay villages," she said. They climbed into a small carriage driven by an elderly man with a gray beard and a long robe. The wind tugged at Nora's scarf, letting it dance in the sun and sand. Along the way, children ran beside the carriage, laughing, while herds of sheep wandered lazily along the stony road. Nora gazed into the distance, the Atlas Mountains appearing as deep violet streaks beneath the sky. "I used to think places this beautiful were only meant for the young," she said. Clara answered calmly, "Beauty doesn't choose age. It only chooses those brave enough to see it." They stopped at a small village where a group of women were dyeing fabric, their hands dipping cloth into vats of indigo blue. Nora sat beside an old woman, watching her wring the cloth with patient, skillful movements. The woman looked up with a toothless smile. Though they shared no language, their eyes spoke easily. Clara took photographs while Nora gently held the woman's wrinkled hand, feeling as if she were touching a piece of her own mother's memory. By afternoon, the wind began to rise. They returned to the riad, sitting beneath the jasmine trellis, sipping mint tea. "I'm thinking about a photo exhibition," Clara said. "It will be called The Women Who Never Look Back. I want you to write the introduction." Nora laughed. "I write literature, not manifestos." "But you're living one." Clara replied, her eyes bright. "Your story speaks louder than any photograph I could ever take." Nora didn't answer. She looked up at the layered clouds. Since leaving Santa Barbara, she had never felt more present, more alive. No one was calling for her. No one was asking for her help. No one depended on her. All she had to do was breathe, live, and feel. Night fell. Clara went out to hear music while Nora stayed in the riad. She opened her phone, meaning to look at the photos Clara had sent, but saw a new email instead, from Ethan Hayes. "Mom, we're home. We went to Greece, and without you, everything felt wrong. I know I was wrong. Please call me." Nora read the message through feeling something hard to name. Not anger, not tenderness. She set the phone down and stepped onto the balcony. Marrakesh glowed beneath her, alive with music and laughter. If I called back, she wondered, would they understand? She shook her head softly. A warm gust swept through, carrying the scent of resin and the sound of distant drums. "Not now," Nora whispered, as if making a promise to herself. "Not yet." The next morning, Clara returned with a folded map. "It's time to move on," she said, laying it on the table. "Greece?" Nora hesitated. "The place they went without me." "All the more reason to go," Clara replied. "Not for revenge, but to reclaim your own sky." 2 days later, they departed. On the flight, Nora gazed out the window. Below them, the Mediterranean stretched like a ribbon of endless blue. As the plane descended into Santorini, white light flooded the cabin, forcing her to shield her eyes. Before them lay the famous white houses, with blue domes clinging to the cliffs, the deep sea shimmering below. Nora stood still, her chest tightening. "They said I was too old to go far," she murmured, "and now I stand where they once stood." Clara smiled at her. No one is too old to find themselves again. That afternoon, they sat on the balcony of a small cafe overlooking the sea. Nora sipped her strong coffee, the fiery glow of sunset washing over her face. She opened her notebook and wrote, "I've seen the place they once promised to take me, but now I've arrived without needing a hand to guide me. I came on my own. As the sun sank into the Aegean, Nora closed her eyes. The sound of the waves whispered like a secret. She didn't know what lay ahead. Gentle Florence, radiant Marrakesh, tranquil Santorini, all of them blending into one long journey. A journey without a destination, only a traveler still moving forward. And that traveler, at last, was herself. The noon sun in Santorini burned like fire. Nora wore a wide-brimmed hat and walked slowly down the white stone path that wound toward the cliffs. The scent of sea salt mingled with wildflowers rising from the rocks. Clara walked beside her camera in hand, squinting against the bright light. "I told you," Clara laughed. "This place is so bright that no one can hide their sadness." Nora looked out at the sea, her eyes reflecting the deep blue water. "Maybe I don't want to hide anymore," she said. "I used to fear the light, afraid people would see how fragile I was. But light doesn't judge anyone, does it?" "Exactly." Clara nodded. "Light only reveals what was always there." They stopped at a small cafe on a hillside. The place was quiet, the only sound the wind whispering through white curtains. The waiter brought them 2 glasses of cold lemonade. Nora took a sip, the soft sourness spreading across her tongue. In the distance, the Aegean shimmered like silver small boats gliding beneath the sun. "When I was young, Nora said, I thought happiness meant being invited to go somewhere with someone. Now I think happiness is knowing where I want to go. Clara set down her camera, her eyes gleaming. And when you go, you don't need anyone's permission. Nora smiled and tilted her head. Yes, no permission needed. That afternoon, they followed narrow stone steps down to the beach. The black volcanic rocks burned underfoot, and the wind was so strong that Nora's scarf flew loose behind her. A group of young tourists were jumping into the sea, their laughter ringing through the air. Clara lifted her camera, snapping shot after shot. Try going barefoot, she said. No. Nora laughed. I don't want to burn my feet. No, Clara said softly. I mean, feel the place you're standing in. Nora chuckled, then slipped off her sandals. She stepped onto the hot sand, the heat pricking her soles. But when the cold seawater rushed up around her feet, she shivered. A surge of feeling, both sharp and freeing, ran through her whole body. Clara captured that moment. Nora standing where sand met the sea, her dress wet, her hair tousled, sunlight scattered across her face. Perfect, Clara whispered. A woman who doesn't need a mirror to know she's beautiful. That evening, they sat on the rooftop terrace watching the sun go down. Santorini shifted from white to amber to deep violet. Nora was silent for a long time. Clara, she asked quietly, have you ever felt like you've been living the rest of someone else's life? Yes, Clara answered slowly. I lived for my husband, for my son, for my students, until they no longer needed me. Then I realized I'd forgotten who I was. Nora nodded. So have I. I disappeared inside my own life without even realizing it. Clara poured more wine. But it's different now. We're taking back the pieces of ourselves through every journey, every person, every evening like this. Nora smiled faintly. You sound like a philosopher. I'm a photographer, Clara replied. We learn to see, and if you look long enough, everyone becomes a philosopher. When night came, Nora took out a postcard. On it was a photo of the Santorini sunset, the orange glow covering sea and sky. She wrote to Lila, I am in the place your father once didn't want me to go, but here I've learned to smile at myself again. When you grow up, don't ever let anyone tell you it's too late to begin. The next morning, Nora woke early while Clara still slept. She walked along the seaside path, the waves soft against the rocks, the wind whistling through narrow gaps. A young boy was setting up his stand of shell bracelets. Nora bought one and slipped it onto her wrist. Etched into the small charm were Greek letters that read, Eleftheria, freedom. When she returned, Clara was sitting on the balcony, sunlight warming her thin face. I'm more tired than usual, Clara said weakly. It's probably just the sun. Nora placed a hand on her shoulder. Maybe we should rest a few days. Clara shook her head, forcing a smile. Not yet. I still want to go to Kyoto, the one place I never reached with him. Nora fell silent, meeting her weary eyes. Inside her stirred a strange feeling, as if this journey was not just travel, but a farewell being written slowly in sunlight and sea wind. That evening, Nora went out alone. The city sparkled cafes still open, tourists drunk with joy and camera flashes. She passed a small church and heard singing drifting out a voice soft as a sigh. She stopped at the doorway and closed her eyes. For a moment, she felt forgiven, not by anyone else, but by herself. When she returned to the hotel, Clara was asleep, her breathing calm. Nora sat beside the bed, gently brushing a strand of silver hair from her friend's face. She whispered, If tomorrow you want to go to Kyoto, I'll go with you. You won't be alone. Outside, the Aegean murmured in the dark. On the table, the yellow scarf shimmered under the lamplight like an unspoken promise between two women. That freedom sometimes begins with holding on to someone's hand and not letting go. Morning in Santorini was wrapped in a thin veil of mist. Clara coughed her voice hoarse, but still managed a faint smile when Nora handed her a cup of hot ginger tea. "Don't worry, it's just a small cold," she said, her voice trailing off. Nora sat beside her, resting her hand gently on Clara's wrist. "We can stay here a few more days," she said softly. "No one is forcing us to go anywhere." Clara shook her head, the familiar spark of defiance glinting in her eyes. "No, I dreamed of Kyoto. I want to hear the wind through the bamboo forest before I die." The words came out as lightly as a sigh, but they struck Nora like a quiet shock. "What did you say?" she asked. Clara smiled, her gaze distant. "I have a heart condition. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want their pity. But I'm tired, Nora. If I can choose, I want to end where I never got to go." Nora gripped her friend's hand tightly. In the gentle morning light, Clara's face seemed framed by a strange peace. "Then we'll go," Nora said, "but this time let me lead the way." 7 days later, they arrived in Japan. Kyoto welcomed them with a clear sky and a cool breeze. Nora helped Clara out of the taxi, and together they walked along a path lined with cherry blossoms in full bloom. Petals fell on their hair, and clothes soft as memory. "It looks like snow," Nora said. "No," Clara replied, gazing up at the trees. "Snow falls to cover flowers, fall to reveal. I'd rather be like the flowers." They rented a small room overlooking a Zen garden. Every morning, Nora made tea while Clara sat by the window, eyes half closed, listening to the birds. Some afternoons, they walked slowly through the Arashiyama bamboo forest, sunlight streaming through the tall stalks in thin golden lines. Nora walked ahead. Clara followed, stopping now and then to take a picture. "I've never seen a place this peaceful," Nora said. "Silence is the rarest thing," Clara answered. "When you can hear yourself, that's when life truly begins." One evening, Clara asked Nora to sit beside her bed. "There's something I want to give you." She pulled out a developed photograph. Nora wearing her yellow scarf standing in the sea at Marrakesh, eyes closed, her hair blowing in the wind. Beneath the photo was a handwritten note for the woman who remembered herself. Nora held the picture, her hands trembling slightly. "Clara, keep it." Clara smiled faintly, her voice weakening. "If one day I'm gone, you'll keep going. For both of us." The next morning, Nora woke to a room filled with sunlight. Clara lay still, her face serene. The camera rested beside her pillow, its lens cap off, as if she had only closed her eyes in the middle of a perfect frame. Nora sat down and took her friend's cold hand in hers. There were no tears, only a quiet stillness like a breeze passing through. She whispered, "Thank you, Clara. You taught me how to see and not to be afraid of looking back." That afternoon, Nora went out carrying the photograph. She walked to the banks of the Como River, where the water flowed softly and locals set lanterns afloat. Lighting one, she placed it gently on the surface, letting it drift away with the evening light. The small glow floated downstream, carrying her goodbye. That night, Nora opened her notebook and wrote Kyoto, where I learned that parting is not an ending, but a door to the things left unsaid. She closed the book and looked up at the night sky, where thousands of cherry blossom petals still fell like tender souls returning to the wind. For the first time in many years, Nora no longer feared loneliness, because somewhere in the whisper of the breeze, she could still hear Clara's voice. "Keep going. There's still so much to see." Morning in Kyoto after Clara's passing, Nora sat by the window watching sunlight filter through tall bamboo stalks. The faint scent of green tea lingered in the empty room. On the table, Clara's camera still rested there, its screen dimly glowing, showing the last photo she had taken. Nora, standing beneath falling cherry blossoms' eyes, closed her silver hair lifted by the wind. Nora touched the frame lightly, her heart tightening, not from grief, but from gratitude. She packed her belongings and folded the yellow scarf carefully. Before leaving the room, Nora wrote a small note and placed it on Clara's pillow. "You didn't just take photographs, you captured my life. I will carry it forward." 2 days later, Nora arrived at the train station. She bought a ticket to Granada, the southern Spanish city Clara had once mentioned as her final dream. As the train rolled on, Nora looked out the window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. The silver hair, the wrinkles, the calm gaze. She hardly recognized the woman staring back as herself. Granada greeted Nora with warm air and the scent of bitter orange drifting through the streets. The city stretched along the foot of the Sierra Nevada white houses, clinging to the hillside. She rented a small room in the Albaicin district, its window facing the Alhambra. In the afternoon, Nora wandered through cobblestone streets, listening to the sound of guitar music floating from a nearby tavern. A middle-aged woman was singing flamenco, her voice raspy and powerful, as if burning every trace of pain into each note. Nora stood still, her chest tight. In that music, she could almost feel Clara smiling somewhere in the air. The next day, Nora climbed the hill to the Alhambra. The path was steep sunlight glowing on the red stone walls. Each step felt like walking through layers of memory. In the palace garden, she sat on a stone bench, watching water ripple in a shallow pool. "Clara, I made it," she whispered. "Just like you wanted." The sound of water answered softly as if blessing her. She opened her notebook and wrote on a new page, "Kyoto taught me about parting. Granada taught me about continuity. Life doesn't end with loss. It opens through memory." As evening came, Nora walked to a small riverside pier along the Darro. A street band was playing an old flamenco tune. Among the crowd stood a young woman with curly hair singing with her whole heart. Nora listened, her eyes filling with tears. When the song ended, the girl bowed. Nora stepped forward, handed her a coin, and said, "You sing as if you've lived through every sorrow." The girl smiled brightly. "You understand because you have too, don't you?" Nora nodded. "Maybe I'm just singing again in a different way." That night, back in her room, Nora checked her phone. A message from Lila read, "Grandma, I saw your photo in a travel magazine. They called you the woman who remembered herself." "You're famous?" Nora laughed, tears slipping down her cheeks without knowing whether they came from joy or emotion. She replied, "I don't need to be famous, darling. I just want you to remember that it's never too late to begin again." A moment later, the phone buzzed again. A message from Ethan's mom. "I read your story in the paper. I'm sorry. I never realized you needed freedom. I just wanted you safe. But now I understand. Safety without freedom is only a cage." Nora read the words slowly, then wrote back, "Thank you, Ethan. You don't owe me an apology. I only hope you learn to see people not through their roles, but through their hearts." That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She stepped out onto the balcony, watching city lights glow against the walls. Music drifted from afar, blending with the wind. She picked up Clara's camera and scrolled through the photos: Lisbon, Florence, Marrakesh, Santorini, Kyoto. Each one was a piece of her, a part she had once let the world forget. She laughed softly and whispered into the night, "Clara, I'm still here, and I'll live once more for both of us." The next morning, Nora woke early and climbed to the highest point of the Alhambra. Sunlight bathed her face, turning the red walls into fire. Nearby, a group of tourists gathered and someone raised a camera. Nora turned, smiled. She knew the picture might travel the world again, but this time she no longer needed to hide behind a name. On her way down, she bought a bouquet of orange blossoms and placed it at the city gate as a farewell gift for Clara. On a small card, she wrote, "For friendship, for courage, for every woman who dared to walk alone." The wind swept through, carrying the scent of flowers into the air. Nora turned away, walking down the stony path. Ahead lay the road to the sea glimmers of blue on the horizon. She knew she would keep going, not to escape, but because life had finally opened its path for her to walk. Morning in Granada was as clear as a blank page. Nora woke early, brewed a pot of mint tea, and opened the window. Church bells rang slowly from the hill, each chime a gentle reminder that time was still moving and that she, who once believed she was too old to begin again, was still here, still living. On the table, her notebook lay open to a new page. She wrote, "Each day is a frame not yet captured. I don't know where today will take me, but I know I won't stand still." She wrapped her yellow scarf around her shoulders and stepped out into the street. The narrow alleys of the Albaicín were still damp with morning mist, and the smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the corner bakery. Nora ordered a cup of coffee and sat by the window watching the street. At the next table sat a young Spanish family, a couple and their teenage daughter, about 16. Their laughter was bright, the mother occasionally resting her hand on her daughter's shoulder, her eyes full of tenderness. The sight softened Nora's heart. She thought of Lila, her granddaughter, with her sparkling eyes and mischievous smile. She opened her phone, found a photo of Lila, and instinctively typed a message. "Sweetheart, I'm in Granada. The flowers here are so fragrant it feels like I could touch their scent. If one day you want to come here, don't wait for anyone and don't be afraid to go alone." Less than 5 minutes later came a reply. "Grandma, I applied for an art program in Berlin. I remembered what you told me. Go even when you're afraid." Nora read it again and again, smiling. Inside her, her heartbeat felt young again. That afternoon, Nora wandered through the local market. Amid the bright stalls, she met an old man selling handmade bracelets. He handed her one, made of red string, and said, "For luck. For those brave enough to change." Nora slipped it on her wrist, feeling as though she was carrying a mark of her journey. On the way back, she stopped at the post office. In her hand was an envelope already addressed to Ethan's home in California. Inside was the photograph of her and Clara taken in Kyoto. Clara smiling and Nora looking straight into the camera with calm eyes. Beneath it, she had written, "To my son, I am not lost. I only went to find the part of me I left behind when I became your mother." Without a second thought, she sealed the envelope, placed a stamp on it, and dropped it into the box. The faint click echoed like the final punctuation of a lifetime spent waiting. That evening, Nora walked along the Darrow River. The golden lamplight shimmered on the water, reflecting the heavy branches of orange trees. At a street corner, a small group was practicing flamenco, the rhythmic clapping, the sound of shoes striking the tiles. An older woman in a red dress rose to dance, her silver hair wild, her eyes blazing. No one cared about her age. They just clapped to the rhythm. Nora suddenly felt her heart surge. She stepped closer, joining the circle of people clapping along. When the woman stopped dancing, Nora said softly, "I've never danced before, but I want to try." The woman smiled. "There is no too late here, only now." Nora slipped off her flats and stepped onto the cool stone floor. The guitar began again, fast and fierce. She closed her eyes, turned, and let her body find its rhythm. No hesitation, no fear of being seen. She danced, imperfectly but full of life. When the song ended, applause erupted. A young man handed her a glass of water and said in broken English, "You dance like someone just born." Nora laughed, tears spilling without her noticing. "Maybe I am," she replied. That night, back in her room, Nora opened her notebook and wrote, "I am no longer the one left behind. I am the one moving forward." Outside, the city stayed awake, music and laughter swirling through the wind. And inside Nora, something bloomed, quiet, radiant, and needing no witness. Dawn in Granada spilled golden light through the window, gently touching Nora's face. She opened her eyes to the sound of birds singing on the balcony. The small room had become part of her rhythm now, simple, scented with orange blossoms and a soft breeze. She brewed a pot of tea, sat at her desk, and opened her notebook. The pages were full. Every line was a step, every memory a fragment of the life she had just walked through. She began a new page and wrote, "Sometimes silence is not loneliness. It is the reward of those who have learned how to stand alone." Outside, the sound of vendors began to fill the streets. Nora wrapped her yellow scarf and stepped down the stairs, planning to buy fruit from the market. At the corner, an elderly man was sketching portraits of tourists. He looked up and smiled. "Madame, may I draw you? I want to capture this morning light." Nora hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She sat on a wooden stool, hands resting on her knees, holding still. The artist drew as he spoke. "Where are you from? California? Far away? And you travel alone?" "No." Nora said softly, "I'm with a friend who taught me to see the world with open eyes and a free heart. She's gone now, but I still hear her voice in the wind." The artist fell silent. After a while, he lifted the sketch to show her. It was Nora sitting beneath an orange tree, the sunlight falling across her face, serene and proud. "I rarely see eyes like these," he said. "They look like someone who has just won something great." Nora smiled. "Maybe I've just won myself." She rolled up the drawing and carried it home. On the way, Nora thought of Ethan, her son who once saw his mother as the quiet background of his own life. She felt no anger anymore, only tenderness. Tenderness for the man who never understood that a mother's silence is not always acceptance. Sometimes it is sacrifice. That afternoon, while Nora was writing, her phone rang. It was Lila. The young girl's voice trembled with emotion. "Grandma, Dad read your letter. He cried. Mom did too. They argued, then went quiet. I think for the first time they truly understand." Nora sat still, a strange sense of peace rising in her chest. "Are you all right, Leela?" "I am. I'm leaving for Berlin soon. But before I go, I want to see you. I want to meet the woman who taught me that freedom has no age." When the call ended, Nora stayed quiet for a long time. The room was filled with light, the air sweet with orange. She whispered, "Paul, do you hear that our son has finally opened his eyes?" The next day, a letter arrived at the hotel. The handwriting was familiar, slightly slanted. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on us even when we gave up on you first. If you come home, I can't promise perfection, but I promise to listen." It was signed, Ethan. Nora held the letter, her heart calm. She didn't cry as she once imagined she would. She simply smiled. "Listen," she murmured. "That's enough." That evening, Nora walked to the city square. The streets glowed under the lights, guitar music floating in the air. She found a small bar and ordered a glass of wine. In one corner, a young woman was singing an old flamenco song, her voice soft as smoke. Nora closed her eyes, swaying gently to the rhythm. When the song ended, the girl approached her. "You're Nora, aren't you? The woman from the article. The woman who remembered herself." Nora laughed. "That's me. But I'm just someone who's living, not a symbol." The girl smiled. "Because of you, my mother started painting again. You made people believe it's never too late." Nora lifted her glass, watching the light shimmer inside it. "Then my journey was worth it," she said quietly. When she returned to her room, she stood before the mirror for a long time. The woman reflected back had silver hair and narrow shoulders, but her eyes were bright and proud. She touched her cheek lightly and whispered to herself, "Still me, but no longer afraid." Then she opened her notebook and wrote one final line. "For the day, tomorrow I will go home. Not to be someone's mother, but to be myself among those who once forgot who I was." Outside, the wind of Granada carried the scent of orange blossoms through the room. Nora closed her notebook and blew out the candle. In the darkness, the light within her burned as brightly as ever. The morning Nora returned to California, she woke to the familiar air, damp, gentle, and scented with grass after rain. From the living room window, she saw sunlight spilling over the trees along the street. The house was silent, as if waiting for her. On the table, the plants Mr. Miguel had tended were still green and thriving. She set down her suitcase, brewed tea, and sat in the chair that had once belonged to her husband. This space, once a prison of routine, was now the beginning of something new. She checked her phone. A message from Lila read, "Grandma, I'll be there at 5. I'm bringing you a gift." Nora smiled. 5 o'clock. 4 hours left to reacquaint herself with silence. She opened the closet and took out the portrait the artist in Granada had drawn. Her face in sunlight, calm and steady, and hung it on the wall beside the photos of Paul and Clara. The three of us, she whispered, 3 people who knew how to live the rest of their lives. In the afternoon, Lila appeared at the door with a bouquet of sunflowers. The girl looked different, her hair shorter, her eyes bright and steady. "Grandma." She said, "I'm leaving for Berlin." Nora opened her arms and embraced her. "I know," she said, "and I'm proud." They sat together on the porch, the golden light soft around them. Lila took a folded sheet of paper from her pocket. "I wrote this after reading your journal in that magazine photo," she said. "I called it Things I Want to Remember." She unfolded it and read slowly, "Don't ask permission to dream. Don't let silence become habit. Love yourself before waiting to be loved. And when the world tells you it's too late, answer that you've only just begun." Nora sat still, her hand gripping Lila's. "You don't know," she said softly, "how many women my age wish they could have heard those words." Lila smiled, eyes shining. "Because you said them first." When the clock struck 6, there was a knock at the door. Ethan and his wife stood outside empty-handed, but with eyes full of hesitation. "Mom," he began, his voice trembling. "We don't know where to start." Nora rose and looked at her son, the man who once saw his mother as a shadow. "You don't have to start," she said gently but firmly. "You just have to show up." They sat around the old wooden table. There were no grand apologies, only silence broken by the soft clinking of spoons and teacups. Laura looked at Nora and said quietly, "I read your letter. I understand now. We were afraid of your age because it reflected our own fear." Nora nodded, her gaze softening. "Then don't be afraid anymore. Age isn't a mirror of decline. It's a reflection of endurance." Lila sat between them, watching as 2 generations relearned how to speak, not through duty, but through honesty. Finally, Ethan said softly, "Mom, we want to start over, not out of pity, but out of missing you." Nora smiled kindly and poured more tea. "If you truly miss me," she said, "let me be a mother to myself first, before I am a mother to you." The atmosphere in the house shifted. The tension faded, replaced by a quiet that no longer felt like distance, but understanding. When they left, Lila turned back and hugged Nora tightly. "I'll tell your story in Berlin," she said. "I want people to know freedom has no age." Nora touched her granddaughter's cheek. "Tell it, but live it too. The most beautiful story is the one still being lived." When the door closed, Nora returned to the living room. Dusk poured through the window, spreading gold across the portrait on the wall. She sat down, opened her notebook, and on the final blank page wrote slowly each word, "A breath I have gone and come back, not as the one who left, but as the one who found herself. I no longer wait for an invitation into life. I've opened the door myself. And if tomorrow I leave again, it will not be to escape. It will be to continue." She folded the notebook and placed it beside her teacup. Outside, the evening wind brushed through the lavender branches. Nora leaned back in her chair and smiled faintly. In the fading light, her face was calm as the sea. Once the woman who was left behind, now the one who chose to stay on her own path.